The world watches as a storm brews over the Middle East, a conflict teetering on the edge of uncontrollable escalation. In the past hours, Beijing has broken its usual diplomatic restraint, issuing an urgent warning that the ongoing war risks plunging the region into a vicious cycle. At the center of this crisis lies the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow yet globally critical maritime passage through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil travels. Its strategic importance has made it a flashpoint as Iranian forces retaliate against U.S. and Israeli operations, targeting shipping lanes and energy infrastructure with alarming precision. Across the Gulf, cities are bracing under the strain of airstrikes and missile barrages. Ports, pipelines, and refineries, already stretched thin by years of geopolitical tension, are now on the brink of systemic collapse. Economists warn that the ripple effects are no longer local. Supply chains from Asia to Europe are vulnerable, and the specter of skyrocketing energy prices looms large. China's warning reflects this stark reality. The war is no longer merely regional. It has become a potential fulcrum for global instability. Beijing's message carries a weight far beyond words. It signals the fear of a self-reinforcing cycle where each military strike begets retaliation, and retaliation sparks further escalation. Behind closed doors, Chinese strategists are calculating the risk of multi-theater conflict, one that could embroil Gulf nations, drag in global powers indirectly, and test the limits of international alliances. In diplomatic corridors from Washington to Tel Aviv, China's warning is being interpreted as a caution. The clock is ticking, and the balance between containment and chaos hangs by a thread. Even now, analysts describe a dangerous inflection point. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a trade artery. It has become a geopolitical pressure valve. How the world responds in the next hours could determine whether the region spirals into a protracted, systemic crisis, or whether diplomacy can still arrest the cycle before it consumes the global stage.
As the conflict intensifies, the global stakes grow ever higher. China's intervention is not purely rhetorical. It is a calculated signal that the world cannot afford missteps. The warning is clear. Continued military operations by the United States and Israel could transform tit-for-tat strikes into a relentless chain reaction, pulling more regional actors into the fray. Iran's hardened posture, combined with fragile alliances across the Gulf, creates an environment where a single miscalculation could ignite broader hostilities. Energy markets are already jittery. Tankers reroute, insurance premiums soar, and stockpiles dwindle as the Strait of Hormuz teeters between functional and frozen. For Asia, particularly energy-dependent nations, the consequences are immediate. Shortages, price shocks, and the risk of economic destabilization. Europe, reliant on Gulf energy, faces the threat of inflation and disrupted industrial supply chains. Beijing understands this with stark clarity, and its statements carry an implicit ultimatum. Global powers must recognize the cost of unchecked escalation. Strategically, China is positioning itself as both a stabilizer and a cautious observer. Should the conflict spiral further, Beijing may be compelled to assert more decisive measures, balancing its economic interests with geopolitical influence. The warning is as much about preventing regional collapse as it is about signaling China's readiness to defend its broader stakes in the international order. At this precarious moment, the Middle East stands at a crossroads. Will diplomacy and restraint prevail, allowing the Strait of Hormuz to remain a conduit for global energy rather than a choke point of crisis? Or will retaliation and rigid alliances lock the region, and perhaps the world, into a vicious cycle from which recovery becomes nearly impossible? As nations weigh their next moves, the message from Beijing is unambiguous. The window to avert catastrophe is closing, and the consequences of inaction could ripple far beyond the sands of the Gulf.